everyone. Welcome back to the HR Exchange podcast. My name is David Rice. I'm the editor of the HR Exchange Network and your host as always. I am joined today by Alysha M. Campbell. She is the Senior Global HR Business Partner at The Economist. Welcome, Alysha.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So Alysha's going to be joining us for our upcoming employee engagement and experience event. And I wanted to talk to her ahead of that around some of the things that she'll be covering and around some of the issues around culture, which is something that she's an expert in. So where I wanted to start with this, one of the things your session is going to talk about is how research shows that factors around belonging, communication, decision-making impact employee engagement. And as I was thinking about this, I began to think about how belonging actually impacts those other two factors. And I think communication is maybe easy to see, but can you talk a little bit about how a culture of belonging impacts decision making and then in turn employee engagement and, the bottom line as well?
Yeah, that's a really great question to start off with. I think it's important that, when you think about belonging, you're really thinking about what builds belonging. Like when someone says, I feel like I belong here, what are they really saying? They're really saying they feel like they could relate to the employees, their peers, their manager, they relate to the business, and they feel like their values align with the organizational values as well. And I think it's important to call that out because if there's not an alignment there, if employees don't see themselves or see how their values and virtues can help build what the organization is doing, you're automatically already not starting on the best foot. But say all of that is in play. Belonging really does help from a communication and engagement perspective, because when you start to see everything through the lens of belonging, your decisions are going to be faceted to ensure that belonging is at the center of everything that is employee centric. And when you think about it, and what I tell a lot of my managers is that a business is the makeup of its employees. If you want an engaged in culture, if you want a higher engagement from your employees, you have to talk to your employees, you have to talk to your teams. Without that type of connectivity, without that type of community, they're not going to feel like they belong or that they're engaged because no one's engaging them. So it's so important that when you think about, okay, how is this decision going to affect the workforce? How is it going to affect my employees and my teams? You need to also think about how is it going to affect how they work together, how they connect, how they see eye to eye, how they collaborate, how they disagree and create healthy conflict. All of that is so pivotal when it comes to these types of decisions that leaders make when it directly affects workplace culture and the work environment. And especially now, more so now that we're all virtual. There's so much that has gone in over the past year and a bit about a virtual culture and how do you continue to keep it engaging and interesting. And managers really had to take a step back and see the role that the decisions they made were playing on employee engagement, because employees are getting burnt out. Employees are now having work in their home, and there's other things going on, competing priorities. So managers really had to tap into the more human side of themselves and say, okay, listen, maybe the productivity level I once saw from this employee, it's making a change. They now have to think about their work. Maybe they have young children at home doing homeschooling. Maybe they have a family member or relative that's been affected by the pandemic. So there's all these competing priorities for time, headspace, and focus from this person that has a lot of things going on. So when you think about belonging, think about, what is my employee going to feel at the end of this decision? How am I supporting them at the end of this decision? And how can I make sure that communication and clarity is at the center of that so that everybody is on the same page? And when you start to think about those types of factors in belonging, when you think about engagement and communication and decision making, it all stems back from the bottom line, because as a workforce is productive, we're producing a service, a product, and eventually that's going to trickle down to the bottom line from that respect. If I have a team that's not engaged, they don't feel like they belong there, they're just doing this to collect a paycheck and go home, then really the customer is going to feel that there's going to be more mistakes in the workflows, processes are not going to be as tight as we want them to be. There's going to be all these little warning signs. So when you really get to the crux of belonging, it's so much more than just a buzzword or just something we just say and would be really cool that our culture is a part of, but it actually is fundamental to your business. And the leaders that can really grasp that and understand how to make that work, those are the ones that are being very proactive, and the community is seeing that, their employees are seeing that, and their consumer is seeing that as well. And that really resonates well with all those different factors and elements, which can be really powerful.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes when you hear it, you think I think people sometimes think it sounds like a little,
Hmm.
mushy gushy or whatever, but you'd really just put a real hard business line on it. And that was good. Um, belonging has this very significant correlation to productivity and retention. Can you describe how you go about measuring that? And what are some of the KPIs that you look to establish when you set out on that journey?
Yeah, great question. I think when I try to measure belonging and when I think about engagement, I make sure that I look to see how are we measuring these things? Like in a normal employee life cycle, we have performance reviews, we have employee engagement surveys, maybe we do pulse surveys where we ask a couple questions every quarter, and then we do like a long survey at the end of the year, et cetera. So I think using those metrics and those data points is really key and really fundamental. But that's not where it stops. I think definitely when you look at how you're able to look at those metrics and say, okay, and split up the data to maybe identify different cohorts that are more engaged than others, or who's progressing faster or at different rates than other cohorts in the business, you can really gather and get some more insights and ideas. But it really comes down to conversation. I tell a lot of my leaders that once you do an engagement survey or a pulse survey, don't just let the data speak for you, like speak for the results of how the organization is feeling. Talk to your people, do focus groups, do different sessions where people can drop in, or it could be optional, and people can really talk about how they're feeling, what's going on, how they view the problems the organization is facing, what they think about the direction the organization is going. And you will see that when employees are given the opportunity to be able to share and to feel like their opinions are valued, and that what they say and what they think in contribution and in relation to the organization is taken seriously, you will see an immense amount of more data points and more information coming your way that you'll be able to make more tactical decisions that will not only drive the business forward, but will make your employees feel heard, recognized, and valued. And that's where, as much as I love employee engagement surveys and I love that we can automate things and make things with a click of a button, you cannot replace a survey with human interaction. Even if it's just like this over a video conferencing platform, you can't replace that with a survey that's anonymized, or you can't ask questions or get further details. So always talk to people, always just connect and be that vessel that employees can go to get more information, and then just talk it out, get more insight. And from there, with all the data points, then make a more rational and a more informed decision.
Yeah, there's no body language in a survey, right?
No.
Um, so there's a lot that goes into culture, obviously. It's a byproduct of human beings coming together, interacting, and so naturally it can get quite intricate. So what are some of the biggest drivers of culture, of a culture of belonging, that companies in any industry should kind of look to replicate?
Yeah, it's funny. I get this question a lot because um, the erosion of culture doesn't just happen overnight. It's through a series of actions, discussions, or lack of, that lead to the culture just feeling totally disconnected and literally left in shambles. And the biggest thing that when I talk to my leaders about culture, and that that people identify culture as that thing you can't really necessarily see, but you feel it. Like when you go into a room full of people, you go into your workplace and there's just a vibe. You just know that if you smiled at someone, they're going to smile back, or they're going to chat you up in the kitchen. And I think it's so important that doesn't just happen overnight. When you bring people from various backgrounds into one atmosphere, in person or virtually, where they need to work together, they need to connect, they need to relate, they need to be able to really work together to meet an end objective. So much goes into that process. Like, I need to be able to trust you, I need to know that you have my back, and that there's going to be clear communication and clear expectations set, and that you're very focused on not just your own success but my success as well. And so at any point in time when any of those key factors are broken down in a culture, that's when the disengagement really starts to happen. And at that point, when you start to see things not getting done on time, that's when you start to see communication falling through the cracks, because people aren't closing the loop. That's when you hear of, customers not having the greatest experience because, they're dealing with so many different stakeholders in the organization and they can't get a clear answer. So I think what's important is that when you're looking at a culture and you're building it out, it is so important that you just start from the basics, start from the very, very fundamental elements. And that truly is clarity and communication. When you are communicating, be as clear and as honest and as transparent with your teams as possible. And the reason that that's so important is because we've come up with this stigma that, as a leader or as a CEO, we need to be so obtuse and so future thinking. And although that's important because that's the vision that you're driving, your employees towards, just being relatable and being honest and saying, okay, we're in a pandemic. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. And this is why. Your employees are grown adults. You have to start to trust them. You have to start to treat them as such and kind of take the kid gloves off, as I say, and just have a real conversation. They will appreciate that. Yeah, maybe you might have to give some news that may not be the greatest, but when they understand the reasoning and they understand that you were honest and upfront about what was going on, you didn't try to sugarcoat anything, they will appreciate that tactness that you took. So don't try to overcomplicate things. Be really simple with your communication. Be very clear. And I would say last to that point is be consistent, because trust is not something where you do one action and then everybody trusts you for the rest of your life. It's those small, consistent actions that you do, that you continue to deliver on, that you continue to stand by, that your employees are like, okay, if this person says why is why is why, I don't need to question it anymore because they've continually shown me that what they say is true, or what they say they follow through on, or if they don't, they follow back up with me to let me know of the update and why the change happened. But if you don't have that consistency and one day you're communicating with them clearly, being upfront and honest, and then they don't hear from you again for another 6 months, it's like, what's going on? Like, it's just like with any relationship, if you have a significant other in your life, you don't go without, weeks and days without talking to them, because then they're going to think, are we really in this relationship or not? Because you don't want to be, communicating with me. It's the exact same thing with your employees. They need to hear from you. They need to feel connected. And that's when you can really start to rebuild and keep that culture.
You mentioned there some of the complexities of bringing people from different backgrounds together, and obviously, DEI, it plays it's a key component in all of this, and we're seeing a greater commitment to that these days. But for companies with a long history of and established norms or ways of doing things, shifting the culture can be a little complicated or difficult at times. So, what sort of
Mhm.
lessons from the embracing of DEI can companies take and translate into other parts of the business?
Yeah, it's a really great question, because I know when I speak with a lot of my leaders and even just within my own HR community, change is always so scary. And with DEI, especially because it's an area that is very specialized, and it's an area that's also uncomfortable to talk about. You're talking about sensitive topics, people get very personal about it, and you could say something with the best intentions, but it may not land in the best way, and you can piss a lot of people off. And so everyone is always so hesitant to make a change, number one, and then two, especially a change around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think what's important with that is that with something that, and this is for any leader and really any employee at all, when you're making a change or when you want to make a change towards diversity, equity, inclusion, that if you're not clear or don't have the best understanding that you can have on the topic, get somebody who does. Because especially in this specific subject matter, there are so many fundamental layers to it. This is not something simple. This is something that is very complex, that goes on for hundreds and is generational and is multifaceted and has many different faces, many different types of different terminology and insights. And so because we live in such a diverse and we come from all different types of backgrounds, it is so important that when we do bring the topic of D&I to the table, that we are inclusive, number one, and that we understand the different nuances. And I wouldn't expect anybody who hasn't gone to school or done some type of course or background in the space to come and start to make changes, because more often than not, you are going to make a mistake. And that's not just because you may not know the background, but even D&I people make mistakes all the time, because our world within the space is constantly changing. So bring in the subject matter expert, do at least at a very basic, an anti-bias training to understand our biases, which is really the cornerstone of a lot of the inequities that we see in all of our institutions. and really understanding that this is not a race. This is a marathon. And when I do my D&I trainings, it's so pivotal that I have a graph actually that I use all the time. And it shows the different shifts of how D&I can come alive within an organization. And there's levels to this stuff. This is not just something where, okay, we're going to put in a program, do a training, we brush our hands and we're done. This is something that takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of time, a lot of patience. And just as we would measure any goal or any objective that we would set up to do, we need to do the exact same thing with D&I. And so I think it's important that when we think about change, we have to be realistic. We have to put our best efforts and intentions forward, but we don't have to do it alone. Get the experts that you need, whether internally or someone from externally outside of your organization. Do it with a melodicness that is thoughtful and very clear, and don't feel like you have to stand up to anybody's expectations except your own. If there's only one thing you can do this year, but you do it really, really well, that's all you can do. I rather in any organization you focus on doing something extremely well versus 10,000 things and they're done only halfway. Because again, this is an experience you're creating for your employees. And so when things start to go wrong, when that time and attention isn't taken, they will see that and then more questions will come into place and you'll get even more disengagement. So very complex, but don't let that scare you. Get the experts you need to make sure you're making the right decisions.
Yeah, I think that's good advice for any part of the business. If you don't know, find someone who does.
Exactly.
These days everybody wants some data and to understand the ROI before it even happens. So what tools are you using to show that and kind of translate what you're doing into
Mhm.
business success that executives will see and feel?
Absolutely. Case studies are massive in the HR space, especially when you're taking on more of that strategic lens. And I take case studies from any applicable industry or business that I find that my business leaders will take value in. So if I don't have the data point in-house because we haven't done it before, or it might be a new area that we're building out for a center of excellence, I get the data points externally. I have a really wide HR network where I'm able to call upon, my tribe and really get those insights, get some context, and then present that back to my business leaders in a way that relates back to why they want to make the change or why this makes sense versus not make sense. And then once they understand, okay, well, this was within, this specific set of confines versus what we would do at our organization, they at least can take the data with a grain of salt to say, okay, well, if this is how it worked here, maybe we could do it differently here. Maybe we can, change it up on this spot, whatever they kind of want to initialize that change for. So if I don't have it in-house, I look externally, and then I also make sure that whatever change they want to make or whatever data point that I need to get for the business to make the decision is that I understand that topic really well myself, because they're going to come with a million and one questions, as all leaders do. So I come as best prepared as possible, understanding that topic, the pros, the cons, the risks, the rewards, and really frame it to say what it is. I don't sugarcoat anything within my role or throughout my HR career. I think it's important that we're always empathetic to the situation, but we have to be real. We have to be honest. Our leaders are trusting us to make those forward-thinking decisions when it comes to their people. So we need to do that in the best way possible. And data can definitely be our friend when we use it the right way.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some interesting data that comes out of this period of time over the last
Oh,
year.
yes, absolutely.
It's certainly going to be a shift from what it was. When the pandemic ends, I think many organizations they're facing this period of time where people will probably switch industries. I talked to a lot of HR leaders at, particularly in healthcare or certain industries where they're expecting sort of a wave of departures where people start looking for new opportunities,
Mhm.
or they start to kind of question what their future looks like. And when you face these periods of high turnover, maybe that's a little bit out of your control. How do you ensure that this culture of belonging, it doesn't get lost, and it's instilled in the new recruits the same way it was with the people who are now
Mhm.
leaving, or the people that are there and are very settled in the company's ways?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, David, because it's been happening probably for the past 6 months, where even in the pandemic, employees are either getting poached for new opportunities, especially in the tech space, especially in specialized marketing areas, and they're leaving for new opportunities, pandemic or no pandemic. It's people got to continue to work and grow and excel in their careers. I think when an organization that's faced with that situation, Creating that sense of belonging is so key because remember, change creates a shift in different thoughts, emotions, and activates differently within various employee groups. So if, especially if it's the person or the group of people that have left or are looking to leave the organization, were culture champions, always rallying around different initiatives and different group, team outings, and they were really that vocal element to, change that's going on in the organization, and then that's now gone. You need to realize that there might be some people who might be a little bit unsettled about that. They might then, oh shoot, should I be looking? Should I now look to see if I need to change opportunities? So the biggest thing I always tell my business leaders is that when people leave or when key critical employees leave the business, you always want to understand if there's any collateral damage, because especially if they've been with the organization a long time, relationships have been built, processes have been built around this person potentially. So understand who those people are, what those processes are, and understand and do a check-in. If a best friend of somebody left, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I know you and this person were really close. You are still so valued here. We have great ideas for you, plans, whatever that might be, so that they can feel safe, they can feel secure, that they still have a home within the organization. And then I think for those new employees that are coming in, it's important that they understand the values. So onboarding, especially in a virtual setting, is so critical to really try to drive that connectivity, even if it's virtually. So talking about our values-based systems, talking about the different culture initiatives, and talking about how we're able to really come together even virtually to ensure that we're still connecting, we're still sharing knowledge, and that the person has different point of contacts to reach out to should they have any questions or need any assistance. And creating that new community for them will really help them to feel like they belong, like they're valued, and that they can start to see this place as their home. But when you just give them a laptop and say, okay, go to work, and you've only got a couple hours with a few people, it really gets you to question, like, okay, is this really where I'm supposed to be? So those high touch point moments are going to be so key, especially in a virtual culture.
Excellent. This was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you joining me today, Alicia.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me.